Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we bring you day 635 of Russian war with Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Alexey Arestovich, Nikolay Feldman, Ukrainian journalist, and Yury Romanenko, founder of the Institute for the Future. Today they address the news that happened during the last few days, and of course, the main topic of discussion is whether Ukraine is missing their golden opportunities by refusing to acknowledge reality the way that it is. Our usual thanks go to our members. Today it is Andrei Patinko and ex-Gaidamak. Thank you guys for continuing to support our channel. And of course to Bill for your super thanks. Much appreciated. And with this, let's deep dive into day 635. Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolay Feldman. This is War Diary with Alexey Arestovich. Live on air. Alexey and Yury are here with us online with our studio. Good evening, gentlemen. Good evening. All right, we restart our War Diary. We were absent for a week, as Alexey did announce earlier. It will be going once a week now in this format. And now we're starting with the fundraiser announcement, which Alexey started yesterday with Vasil Halovanov for 110th Brigade that is fighting near Avdeevka. And we are raising 2 million hryvnias, first of all, for the birds, for the Mavic UAVs. We've been helping the 53rd Brigade rather successfully, so now it's the turn of 110th. I suggest we go again to the map, to the front line. There are too many events happening there, especially in Kherson. Perhaps it'll be an interesting dive into the events. Right, for the first time, Ukraine command acknowledged that A, our troops are on that bank of the river, and B, they're actually conducting active warfare there. And today we observed some screams from the Russian side that it's not only Ukraine troops are present on that bank, but they also are continuing to push and actually increasing their purge. We're holding the area near Krynki, about 3 kilometers long, 600 yards deep. It is not an easy task because against them there are 3 Russian brigades which have a task to kick them back in the water. But these brigades are not exactly successful in these tasks, but one cannot say that our guys are having an easy day there. It is a difficult and bloody job over there. And soldiers, of course, need all kinds of support, including moral, including with certain materials and financial and everything for the resources that they need. And moral support is very important for our troops because imagine yourself on that bank of land with the water behind you and you're just holding a little piece there. And they're solving a very difficult task. They're pulling onto themselves a serious amount of Russian troops that would be otherwise used in other directions, in other areas of this front. So if we're going from left to right, let's continue in orderly fashion. So yeah, over here we can look near Orekhov, that one, Rabotina. The fighting definitely continues. This is a Tokmak protrusion, Tokmak part of front. We have succeeded on the flanks, and we actually got, you see the blue area that we got right on the left side, not the one that Nikolay was betting before. So we were successful in increasing the area here, and of course we are pushing further to the south. Russian troops are trying to stop us and hold their territory. They're holding the dominating heights in the area, which makes the actions of our troops much more difficult. In order to change the situation drastically, we need to increase the number of our troops there by at least 3 times, and since this is not happening apparently, we're fighting for small pieces of land, for every grove, for every little hill, every little trench. And I was petting this flank because there was a big protrusion of Russian troops here, and it seems like we actually pushed them out. Yeah, we did. They had a good push initially, but then we straightened them out here. So these troops are very successful in this part of front. But in the scale of the government and the whole war, these are tactical fights. They're not easy for the ones fighting them, but they have tactical meaning at the current moment. There are more fights all along this front, near Pologi and further, but all these fights and skirmishes are of tactical character. There were several attempts by Russian troops to push near Ugledar. They were all pushed back. And of course, they're also trying to push near Marinka without much success. And the main events of this front right now is near Avdeevka and in Kupyansk. So between two pincers of these Russian troops, it's about 8 kilometers. That's the distance. 120 caliber mortar can cover that area roughly at the limit of its length, but yeah, it can. And I cannot remember any case in military history when in this configuration of the front line, the holding side managed to hold onto it. But we're solving another task here too. We are grinding down and making them waste their troops in this area. So one of the tasks in this case actually turns into destruction of their resources so that they cannot continue with their war efforts at large after this part of campaign is over. And this seems to be the main task that is being solved now for one very reason, because if we do not make them waste their troops here, they will use their troops someplace else. And since they all got here, we are destroying them here. Russian army is concentrating the resources here, near Avdeevka, moving them over from Kupyanskoye direction, including, and near Bakhmut. Let's also look at this part. There were a lot of rumors that Russians captured Klishevka back. There was semi-official note from our Minister of Defense that this is not so, but they're definitely taking efforts to continue their push, rather serious ones. So this is the phase when their side is doing their counter, I wouldn't call it counter-offensive, but it's counter-attacking actions. They're tactical. They're trying to compensate for the loss of territory there they suffered. They're not really successful, but they're really trying, and it's not an easy moment for our troops. Now, if we go further north towards Silver Forestry, Serebranskoye Lesnichestvo, for the last several days it disappeared from the news, but the tactical fights continue there. Very difficult situation. They're fighting in all that mud and almost completely destroyed forest on a short distance, pistol distance, so it's difficult. But there's no general change of the front line there. It's skirmishes in the dead forest. Now let's take a look at Kupyansk direction. This whole line is on fire too. There are a lot of tactical fights here, and they're trying to get to Kupyansk here on the map on the left. Very intensive fighting going on, probably second in intensity after Avdeevka, and in meanings as well. At least as meaningful as they are for the Russian command, and we got information that from this group of Russian troops here, some of them are actually being thrown to Avdeevka. So they're slightly decreasing the concentration of their troops on the side, but it doesn't really make our fight easier. There are a lot of Lancet drones on their side that are being used, and yesterday, for example, our troops pushed back another counteroffensive attack by Russians with big losses that Russians suffered in the process, and there were several of these during last week. So this zone is definitely a hot zone where Russian command has a task of taking Kupyansk as a big railroad junction and road junction. But here their perspectives are more nebulous than near Avdeevka. It depends upon the concentration. If they had the concentration like near Avdeevka, they would start getting some successes in that part of the front too. That means that out of 1,300 kilometers of the front line, with over 400,000 troops, Russian command can, I wouldn't even say they have guaranteed success, but they can hope on one part of the front to be successful for that whole 400,000 group that they accumulated. There's only one part of the front where they aggregated enough concentration that allows them to solve some tasks. I would remind that at the beginning of this war, Russia had 9 directions like this along the front line. Okay, let's go back to Kherson. There was some information last week. Maybe you remember that. It was sent in official media in Russia that they are withdrawing troops from that part of the front, and then the news disappeared. So what do you think it was? Do you think it was the leak of what is going to happen, or was it a prank, or what happened? I don't quite see where they can retreat there, Nikolay. There's nowhere to withdraw. They're about 80 kilometers away from the mouth of Crimea in that part. So I think anyone who would mention an idea in Russian command about a retreat, they would not be holding their position for much longer. And Teplinsky was brought there instead of Makarevich because he is considered to be more energetic and more dynamic general and almost the most precious of their fold at the moment. So their attention is probably to increase the effort on this front and not to retreat. And then again, even if they withdraw and allow our troops to hold a larger territory on the left bank, then they would have to be solving the same tasks over and over again on the new positions. So I wonder if that was a special operation, or maybe somebody hacked their site and posted, and the others just grabbed it and ran with it as well in the media. But for now, their main effort is really to push our troops back away from that bank, and Teplinsky is trying to solve that with his paratroopers. So next year, military of Ukraine will need to transfer to a strategic defense phase of this war. The article by Haas in Foreign Affairs is stating that proposition. Before that, there was a publication from the magazine Economist, who published Valery Zaluzhny, who was also talking about essentially the same, that the next year will be the year of defense. And Haas came out with a publication that holds theses that also repeat some of Zaluzhny's statements, some of your statements that you were bringing up over and over on our streams. And I want to suggest to analyze some of these theses that were published. One of the key elements of this article is that the West should not exert pressure on Ukraine to make it forfeit the effort of rebuilding the Ukraine to the border of 91, and also to make Russia pay for the destruction it caused. Still, the West needs to convince Ukrainians that they need a new strategy to achieve these goals. This is thesis number 1. Yury. Nikolay, I think you're starting this article wrong, because you need to first go throughout the whole article. It is very logical, and you're kind of starting from the end. So I would address it differently. Why this article is important? Richard Haas is a rather influential guy. He wrote this article together with Kupchan, and in March of this year, they wrote a fundamental article on Ukraine where they warned about probability of getting into a strategic stalemate and the necessity to start preparing for that. So back then they were talking about the limits of possible in the Ukraine counteroffensive and the limits of support of the West. Back then the article resonated rather largely, but in our country not too many people listened to them. However, Haas is actually a very influential person. He is the President Emeritus of the Council of Foreign Relations, and this is a very influential structure, organization in the United States. One needs to understand that Haas and the Council on Foreign Relations is not a simple think tank or group of experts. They were founded back in 1921. They are basically a platform for a lot of different opinions and discussions, and this is an important step to understand the context. I have a translation into Russian and Ukrainian in Khvilya on the site, so people could read and understand the meaning of this. Now, second, the salt of this article is in the initial formulation, where Haas is talking with Kupchan that Ukraine needs to rebalance the means and goals. This is the key element. And The very precise formulation in the second article says as follows. At first, he is stating that counteroffensive indeed stalled. Everybody knows that. And that situation requires a complex of reevaluation of strategy between Ukraine and its partners. And such reevaluation opens an unpleasant picture. Ukraine is following a trajectory that is very different from the capabilities that they currently have. Ukraine goals to restore the borders and restore Crimea and its ownership of all the occupied territories, they remain actual, but right now they are judicially and politically unequivocal, but strategically they're unattainable at the moment. And that is why Washington has to lead new politics that would combine the actual reality between measures, means, and capabilities. And basically, this article puts back the same light of those 12 questions that we discussed that were posed by the Republican side. And later in the article, they discuss the logic that they need to follow between Ukraine and the West. Right, Alexey? Yes, everything is very precise in this article, very logical. He is stating correctly that it is deadly in any action that you're doing, whether you clean the weeds, wash stuff in the house, or repair things, or conduct a war, when you state the goals that are unattainable. You don't have means to achieve certain goals, and it is just dangerous to then follow the route. That basically highlights that our trajectory is unstable right now, that we can not only plan proper, but there is a huge risk of not following and folding at some point with our attempts to get there. And I want to make a sidestep here, Alexey. I want to bring it to light that in the United States there is serious discussion. Yesterday there was an article in Wall Street Journal where the United States are ready for war. And it is built around the interview with Senator Tom Cotton, who is, I understand, a Republican, and he is saying that the United States observing and supporting Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan, they're not making conclusions looking at what's going in Israel and Ukraine. Because Ukrainians showed very high adaptability and creativity in using old machinery, old technologies and old approach, and combining that with new technologies and new inventions in a way that same that Israel is doing. Israel is very creative. Even Hamas fighters are creative as well. So Cotton is saying that we can imagine as much as we want that you can just be pressing buttons sitting in Columbia, DC, but in reality, nobody will replace a real soldier who is out there dirty in mud and who is killing enemies approaching at a short distance and instilling his will upon the enemy until the enemy is either killed or withdraws. And this is a discussion of realism that is opening now in the United States, in their media. This is somewhat of an intro line to the same logical canvas that Haas is exploring in his article. So here I want to especially highlight that Haas is talking about obvious part of picture that Ukraine should not be refusing from ultimate restoration of its borders, of getting Russia to pay for and to be responsible for all the damages they've done. But you need to transfer the closest priorities from trying to liberate 20% of territory which is occupied to actually managing 80% that they still hold effectively. He's stating a very simple thought, right, Yury? And it goes like a red line to the whole article. You're fighting for these 20% as if everything is all right on the remaining 80. You're holding 80% of your country. These 80% of Ukraine is still one of the biggest territories in Europe, controlled by one government, maybe slightly smaller than France, okay, second largest in Europe. This territory has a lot of tasks, a lot of needs to be addressed. And there are a lot of things that need to be reformed. So you need to also find ways to make sure you have resources to wage a protracted warfare with Russia. So good strategy is the one that matches your resources. Bad strategy is the one that doesn't care about resources. Good strategy also allows you to build more resources to achieve more tasks in the future. Right, I'll quote here a bit more from his article. This war is not only the war that Ukraine cannot win, meaning in the current stage, with current goals that have been stated by Ukraine and collective West, because I would remind here that at the end of last autumn, collective West generally bought into supporting Ukraine in counteroffensive effort. They were on the same page that they needed to provide more resources for Ukraine to hopefully regain more, deoccupy more territories. But here he is saying that Ukraine is facing a risk of losing enough support from the West over time, and it's more important for Kiev to actually turn the remaining part of the country, the 80%, into a flourishing democracy that has enough resources to continue achieve its goals rather than waste what they have in trying to recapture back the 20% which are occupied. And restoring Ukraine to a successful country, successful economically, would be also a sound defeat of Russian ambitions. Do you want to say something, Alexei? Yeah, just finish your thought. I will chime in. So the most interesting here is that here above in this article, that today we are where we are on the battlefront in Ukraine. It looks like a very expensive stalemate. Time will not be on the side of Ukraine, especially if this war continues into perpetuity without defined goals and timeframes. Then he also discusses the same thing, that Russia is building up its military capability. Danilov mentioning today also said that Russia might go into total mobilization after presidential elections in March of 24. And Haas basically is saying that Ukrainians, you need to regain the initiative at the moment together with the West. Ukraine needs to get this initiative, pass the ball to the West, so the West would start the negotiation process. And this needs to show the Western elites and Western societies that Ukraine is behaving constructively. And he also separately outlines that Putin is probably going to refuse negotiations on this stage of war. But this is not a problem, as he states, because this motion would actually allow to define Ukraine and the West as the constructive part of the deal. Basically, see, we tried to negotiate, but if Russia is refusing, then the West can harden the sanctions and throw more resources to fortify military industrial capability of Ukraine. And Ukraine can then concentrate on losing less people in the counteroffensive efforts. Here was a good formulation. He's saying that the move of strategy in this direction will change situation towards Russia, basically forcing them to achieve the goals in a way that they are incapable of, basically to be successful in conducting combined military operations, complex military operations on the front. So he is basically saying if Russia refuses to negotiate with the West about Ukraine, they might continue their military operations, but since they're ineffective in that kind of warfare, they will be just wasting their people and resources in this offensive and this motion. And such a change in strategy will save more Ukrainian lives, will diminish Ukrainian dependency on the support, on military support from the West, even if American support will dwindle and it will be just Europe that will be supporting Ukraine. So he wants to hedge Ukrainian risks because he is concerned with the Republican turn in the American foreign policy, which may happen after presidential elections. And he is recalculating the resource base that Ukraine may be left with. He understands that there'll be definite part of European countries who will be supporting Ukraine. In any case, Sikorsky and Duda came out with statements that Ukraine needs to be supported in any case. There has to be some optimization of strategy, however, carried out based on the resources that are for sure will be available next year and later if the war will last longer than that. And we need to recalculate human resources, economic resources that Ukraine has, and it's obvious that we need to optimize them in order to make Ukraine more effective in regards to managing them. And that's about it. Right? He's saying a very understandable thought to us and to our core audience. I hope it will be understandable to many other people in Ukraine, including those who are making decisions now. He's saying, let's stop and take a stock of the situation. Like in chess, review the field and evaluate the possibilities. Chess players, you can divide them into two groups: the ones who do it badly and the ones who do it well. The ones who do it bad, they never win. The ones who do it well, they sometimes win. And he also outlines that there is also a war fatigue on the West. This effect exists, and he is suggesting other ways to work with it. And that fatigue indeed can provoke Republican turn and whatever they call it in United States. So you can remedy that by announcing that you are ready for negotiations. Putin will likely refuse them, and then he will be the bad guy, and you guys will be not only constructive, but you also will be adequate. We cannot fully call you constructive because there is no suggested construct for us to fit in, but at least we'll be adequate. And as we were talking here, we actually were talking on this stream way before that we need to indeed understand the real situation. The West is getting a bit tired. Our resources are limited. Our viewers, some of them start to scream, and Ukraine society at large starts to scream, oh, you're selling yourselves to Russia. But we need to understand that we have to work not only with the reality of Putin, who wants to continue fighting this war and preparing for a new offensive, but also with those who are saying that, yeah, he is preparing, but we've been supporting Ukraine and now we're tired and Ukraine is not adequate. They still have 80% of their territory and they still don't want to negotiate or talk about anything, and they don't want to pay attention to us being tired of all that. So Haas is suggesting, okay, make a step forward. Say that, hey, you guys are ready to negotiate. Putin will likely cancel this effort, and then you come back to these tired guys and saying, listen, we tried, we listened to you. He's not going to stop, then we don't have a choice. Then we need to have a second breath and we continue our effort and try to make it as effective as possible. And right now, our society at large is looking at Putin and his direction with big eyes and screams, and we don't even pay attention to our Western allies. We are losing support, actually. Have you seen the data? Have you seen the data that Julia Zabelina published today, referencing Republican sources? And she analyzed the amount of support that American president has from Republican side and the Trumpians as a separate segment of that cohort. And this is a rather drastic number. I think 67% of Trump's electors do not trust, of Trump's voters do not trust Zelensky. This is essentially a fiasco of Ukrainian politics on the Republican front. Republicans are domineering and dominating in American politics, and they likely will continue going forward. Today, by the way, was birthday of Biden, and yeah, you can kind of congratulate him that Trump is an official polls and now way above Biden. He actually passed him in the polls of public opinion. And this trend continues, and we cannot not pay attention to that. Nikolay, you can probably voice these numbers. I think it'll be a sentencing to ourselves if we continue ignoring it. Right, 50% of Republican voters do not like Zelensky, do not trust him. 35% confirm and like what he is doing. Among Trumpians, 69% do not like Zelensky, they accept him negatively, and only a small portion, 15%, take him positively. So imagine this is what controls the lower branch of American legislature. Will it be helpful to Ukraine? These trends will increase, and it means very specific thing for us. We need to start working with Republican wing, not only with Democratic. And we need to offer very concrete answers to those questions that they formulated. Remember, there's that channel Alpha&Omega that came out with similar questions even before Republicans, right? But this is a separate, just a nod and a compliment to ourselves. But real situation cannot be qualified in any way other than strategic dead end. We cannot qualify it in any other fashion. There are a lot of proof and a lot of information coming both from the front and from the Western press. And discussions that are happening in the Western political and expert society at large. And they're still voting, if you remember, on the new budget on new funds for Ukraine that likely will happen at the end of January now, and that means that we'll have to uncork our gold reserves in Ukraine and to start choosing between making social payments or paying for the war effort. With that, we're getting ourselves in a very uncomfortable situation. Now, again, if we are given $300 billion, we are still have not solved the problem, because you cannot load dollars in your guns. You need artillery shells. Today, the Minister of Finance, who is visiting Ukraine together with Lloyd Austin, she has said that Ukrainians are completely dependent on American help, fully, entirely. To let go of American support, I think historians will have to investigate then, how did we get into this position? We are in a strategic stalemate, and it's a stalemate when we are still standing, but the floor starts to tilt over. And we're at the risk of that becoming a strategic pit. And Haas is bringing it to light, saying, guys, you need to start paying attention. You look like you're smart and adult, at least part of you, and you need to start working with the West. You need to start responding to our questions that we formulated, and to make several motions that might change this opinion. And this will change the way that you are supported by the West. Now, I want to pay attention to another part of his article. There is something there that we talked about, I talked about for the last 2 weeks at least, that Ukraine needs to highlight its strategic goal in this war. And this strategic goal should be guarantees of security. Because yes, if we get guarantees of security, we are in good shape. That's what we need to be fighting for. Our strategy has to be directed at this, so we get very precise and sharp guarantees, not some Budapest memorandum that everybody will wipe their butts with before even exiting the room where they sign it. So Haas is saying that in order to make this bitter pill sweeter for Ukraine, he understands that inside NATO there are different parts that are of different opinions. There is Hungary, there is Turkey. So he suggests that we define the list of countries. Basically, Zelensky and Yermak were also doing a similar effort, trying to negotiate with concrete countries, with select countries, not necessarily NATO as an organization at large. For example, Poland, Great Britain, and some other countries will gladly sign it. And the United States, of course, would be a key element. We understand that United States is a key element. Without United States, there is no NATO. So he is saying that these countries will have to take responsibilities of not only supporting Ukraine militarily in the long term, but also guarantee its security. And it will be reliant on Article 4 of NATO that suggests immediate consulting every time when territorial integrity of a member is under threat. And he's also saying that European Union that recently announced that they're ready to take Kiev into its fold, they need to expedite this effort and find an easier way to integrate Ukraine into European Union. Western allies also need to understand that most sanctions against Russia will remain in force until Russian troops will leave Ukraine territory and will help to restore Ukrainian integrity territorially at the table of negotiations. Now, that situation might also be exacerbated with the presidential elections in the 24th. He is not excluding the probability that it may be not Trump who will take the White House. Right, or probably it could be Trump as well, but his politics might change and be different from rhetoric pre-elections. So he is continuing, if the successor in the White House will continue the line of supporting Ukraine and general allies line on the West, then Putin will have very little wiggle room to try to imagine a different future where America does not support Ukraine. But it is time for us to work now. United States need to start this work now to switch to a new strategy that reflects new reality. Do a different motion and you'll be risking a Ukrainian future without any clear probability and perspective in sight. So he's suggesting that you guys take stock of what you are doing now that will put United States institutionally into position where they will be guaranteeing your security. If United States change their management and leadership and they're not in any way obligated to support Ukraine, and Ukraine then will find itself in a very difficult position. So for us, it is definitely a bitter pill. He is saying that right in this article. But I think the worst thing for us is to continue running with the logic of Don't Look Up, that movie, right? I think you'll remember. Great movie. Last week, I'm under deep impression from the movie Bucha. It's a good movie that's shot by Ukrainian crew, and it just poses fundamental questions for Ukraine and for the West. That life is there where there is overcoming of fear. When the man leaves his fears and starts to act upon them and starts to look into the eyes of reality, like that volunteer whose movie is based on, whose character, and we'll bring him to our studio and have a conversation with him how he was saving those 200 men whom he helped to leave Bucha and the vicinity of Kiev. And when I was watching this movie, I was thinking that if we will not look up, if we will not be looking at reality, how we did before the 24th of February, how we did before the 2014, when we denied over and over a sign after sign, a signal after signal, we will have a very sad reality, very bad for us. Then there'll be Bucha 2, 3, 5, Mariupol 10, 11, 12. They will repeat themselves. We need to understand that we need to get out of the shell and find ways to work with our citizens who refuse to acknowledge the reality. It's a difficult situation, but it's not deadly. We have a good chance of getting out of it and get into the positive if we do it right. It depends upon our collective effort of our president, society, organizations, army, everybody. But this agenda needs to be in the most radical way, logically analyzed and strategized upon. We need to start acting on it. And I'll give the ball to Alexey at the end of my spiel. And before I do that, I went to one of the websites in Russia. Somebody sent me a link, and I just looked at their news. In Izhevsk, 3 trade centers are now converted into UAV assemblies. They're kicking businesses out. They're tearing their contracts, so their rent contracts of space, and they're building UAV factories out of it. So Russia is full-scale rebuilding its military-industrial capability. In Samara, they started another factory that'll be producing 7 models of UAVs. In Yelaboga, they're investing about 80 billion rubles into the production of motorboats. Imagine why. Why do they need so many motorboats, right? Military, that's planning. And 1 billion into the UAV factory. And the production will be 6,200 square meters. Mordovia also starts another UAV production. Another factory started for the Lancet-type drones, and so on and so forth. Danilov today made an exactly right statement that we need to be prepared for bad eventualities, that Russia might actually start with a total mobilization next year. That can be a reality, and if we do not bring ourselves to understand the real events, we will be facing very serious problems. That's it.